In 2009, 10-year-old Emily Rourke knocked on the last door of the night, selling cookies for her scout troop. She never made it home. Despite massive searches, no trace was ever found. No clothing, no witnesses, not even footprints in the snowy cul-de-sac. Her parents were left with a box of unsold cookies and a silence that never stopped screaming. But 15 years later, during a routine home renovation, a contractor in the very same neighborhood pulled back insulation in a crawl space. And what he saw inside shattered a town's peace, reignited a cold case, and revealed a truth no one could have imagined. The snow had begun to fall harder by the time Emily Rourke reached the edge of Brookpine Circle, a curved row of split-level homes that ended in a cul-de-sac bordered by dense woods. Her gloved fingers clutched the small cardboard box filled with the last of her cookies, Thin Mints, Caramel Delights, and one remaining box of shortbreads. The wind bit at her cheeks, turning them pink, but she pressed forward, boots crunching in fresh snow, the scarf around her neck slightly askew. Her mother had said she could finish the street before dinner. It was nearly dark, the porch lights beginning to flicker on one by one like stars waking up. She had 5 houses left, 5 doors to knock on, 5 more chances to reach her sales goal and win the little plastic trophy her troop leader promised. Emily had been so proud of her chart, the red stars next to each house she'd visited. So close, just a little farther. She stopped in front of number 87, an older house with green shutters and a sagging porch railing. It looked different from the others on the street, less festive, less cared for. No snowman out front, no lights along the roof. The mailbox tilted at an angle like it had been struck once and never fixed. Still, Emily climbed the steps and rang the bell, bouncing slightly to keep warm. Her mittened hand reached up to brush some snow from her eyelashes as she waited. Inside, a light flicked on. She smiled wide, the way her mom had taught her. Show them you're polite, confident, and kind. The door opened just a crack, and a single eye peered through the gap. "Hi there," Emily said brightly, lifting her cookie box. "Would you like to buy some Girl Scout cookies? I have just a few left." There was a pause. The door opened a little wider, revealing a man in his late 40s, dressed in a threadbare sweater. He didn't smile. His eyes moved from Emily's flushed cheeks to the cookie box, then back to her. "I've got $5, he said flatly. She held out the shortbreads, knowing they were the least popular, but still her favorite. "These are the best in snowstorms," she joked. He reached for the box, then looked around the yard. "You out here alone?" Emily hesitated. "My dad's just down the street," she said quickly, though it wasn't true. Her parents had trusted her with one last round, just these last 5 doors. He gave a small nod, stepped back, and held the door open wider. "Why don't you come in and get warm while I get my wallet?" Emily hesitated, the snow now thick on her coat. Her parents had told her not to go into anyone's house, but it was so cold, and it would just be a minute. She glanced behind her, saw no one on the street, then took one small step forward. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click, and Emily Rourke was never seen again. The casserole had just started to brown at the edges when Melanie Rourke glanced at the clock above the stove. 6:12 p.m. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, turning down the oven slightly. Emily had said she'd be home before 6. Just the last 5 houses, Melanie reminded herself. She didn't like her daughter out in the dark, especially with the snow starting to fall harder, but they had agreed, this one time. Emily had wanted that sales ribbon so badly. She walked to the front window and pulled the curtain aside. The street was nearly swallowed in white, the porch lights of neighboring houses casting hazy halos in the snowfall. No little figure in a pink coat. No Emily. Melanie called up the stairs. "Derek, can you check the end of the street? She should have been back by now." Her husband's muffled reply came down, followed by the sound of boots, thudding to the floor. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The casserole was forgotten. Derek returned, brushing snow from his shoulders, his expression already uneasy. "I didn't see her. I walked the whole loop." "She couldn't have gone far. Maybe she stopped in to warm up," Melanie said quickly, her voice sharp with forced optimism. They called her phone, straight to voicemail. Texted, no response. Melanie was pulling on her coat before Derek could stop her. "I'm just going to retrace her path. Maybe she lost track of time." The cold hit her like a slap as she stepped outside. The neighborhood was quiet, muffled in snow. Her boots sank into the fresh layer as she walked door to door, knocking, asking, had anyone seen her daughter about this tall pink coat selling cookies? Most hadn't. A few had bought a box, smiling at the memory. "She's such a sweetheart," one woman said. But no one had seen where she went after that. By 7:45, Derek had contacted the police. By 8:30, cruisers lined the cul-de-sac. Officers fanned out, flashlights slicing through the dark, through the trees that bordered the neighborhood. Melanie's breath came in short gasps, hands numb inside her gloves. She kept calling Emily's name into the silence, as if volume could rewrite reality. Neighbors joined the search, their voices echoing across backyards and through garages. A few people brought their dogs. Someone brought hot cocoa. No one brought answers. By midnight, the neighborhood was a crime scene. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints leading away. Just one set of small tracks that stopped abruptly at the end of a driveway. Like Emily Rourke had been plucked from the earth and vanished into thin, frozen air. The week after Emily disappeared felt like living underwater, everything muted, distant, surreal. Melanie Rourke moved through the house like a ghost herself, folding and refolding the same dish towel, unable to sit still, unable to breathe unless someone told her they had news. Derek stopped shaving. He stopped changing his clothes. He spent hours at the dining table poring over maps and printed Facebook messages, highlighting the routes Emily might have taken, scribbling on notepads as if the right sequence of lines would summon her back. The police came and went like a second family. Detectives sat on the floral couch in the living room asking the same questions over and over. What was she wearing? Did she know anyone new? Had she seemed upset recently? Had they checked her search history? They had. And there was nothing. No boy, no secret plan, no diary entries hinting at fear or escape. Emily had been exactly who she seemed to be. Bright, bubbly, grounded. A 10-year-old girl with an open heart and a box of cookies. Search crews dragged the woods for 2 miles beyond the cul-de-sac. Cadaver dogs, drones, helicopters. They drained the nearby retention pond and sifted through frozen ditches. Flyers went up on telephone poles, in grocery stores, taped to school windows already fogged by the breath of watching children. A candlelight vigil was held in the community park 5 days in. Hundreds came. Emily's troop stood in a row wearing sashes and pink gloves. Melanie tried to speak, but no words came. Derek spoke for them both, his voice breaking when he asked whoever had her to please, just let her come home. You can leave her somewhere safe. We don't need to know your name. Just let us have our daughter back. The clip made it onto the national news that night. A week later, their front yard was filled with satellite trucks and camera crews. News anchors sat on folding chairs while Melanie stood just inside the living room, staring at them through the lace curtains, wondering why no one had brought her Emily instead. Tips poured in. Someone thought they saw her at a rest stop in Idaho. Another caller swore she matched a girl panhandling near a bus station in Chicago. They followed them all. None were her. 31 days after she vanished, the media moved on. The search was scaled down. The Rourkes came home from a press interview to find Emily's snow boots still by the door, her cocoa mug still in the sink, a tiny crust of marshmallow dried on the rim. Her room remained untouched, just in case. Number 87 had always been a little off. Even before Emily disappeared, neighbors spoke in lowered voices about the man who lived there. Harold Stokes, mid-50s, retired early for reasons no one quite understood. He didn't decorate for holidays, didn't wave from his porch, didn't mow his lawn until the weeds threatened the sidewalk. Kids whispered that he watched people from the attic window, though no one ever had proof. He kept to himself, and that was enough for the whispers to grow legs. After Emily vanished, those whispers turned into pointed fingers. Melanie remembered the way the detective's voice shifted when he said the name. "Your daughter's last confirmed stop was Mr. Stokes's house. Did she know him?" "No," she answered, but she didn't know most of the people she sold cookies to. The investigators questioned Harold that same afternoon. He answered the door slowly, blinking into the snow as if surprised the world still had people in it. He let them in without protest, said he'd bought a box of shortbreads, gave her the $5, and that was it. "She left," he said, shrugging. "I didn't invite her in." They checked the house. Every room, the basement, the attic, even the garage, where a single dusty canoe leaned against the wall like it had been there since the Reagan administration. There was nothing, no blood, no fibers, no sign a child had ever stepped more than a few feet inside. A receipt for the cookies was found on the coffee table, folded beneath a stack of junk mail. Still, his answers didn't sit right with anyone. Something about the way he talked, flat, disconnected, left people cold. Parents began pulling their children inside when they saw him walk past. Teenagers dared each other to ring his bell after dark. Someone scrawled "Monster" on his mailbox in red chalk. Harold said nothing. He filed no complaints, just kept his blinds drawn and his porch light off. By the following spring, a for sale sign appeared in his yard. The house sat empty for months before a young couple bought it. They painted the shutters, replaced the mailbox, planted a rose bush by the stoop. But Melanie never forgot. Even after the detectives cleared him, even after he left town, she never again let herself walk past that house. When she dropped off mail or flyers, she crossed the street and kept her eyes forward. Because something had gone wrong in that house, even if she couldn't prove it. She felt it every time the wind blew from that direction, cold and sharp and unfinished. The crawl space smelled like mold and forgotten years. Nate Wilkes tugged his headlamp tighter against his forehead and ducked beneath the low beam of the house's underbelly, boots scraping across compacted dirt. Cobwebs brushed his face. A mouse scurried past his boot, disappearing into the shadows. He exhaled sharply and pressed on. The job was supposed to be simple, reinforce the sagging foundation of a decades-old house that had stood too long without proper upkeep. The owners, newlyweds from Portland, had bought it on the cheap with dreams of transforming it into a bed and breakfast. Nate had been hired for the heavy lifting. He'd done jobs like this before, all over the state. This one was no different. Except it was. He'd heard the whispers from the neighbors when his crew first arrived. A few of them had stopped by, offered coffee, conversation, and warnings. "That house," one woman had said, lowering her voice like she was sharing a family secret, "it used to belong to that man," the one they suspected when the little girl went missing. Emily Rourke. Remember that? Nate had nodded politely, not wanting to get drawn into small-town ghost stories. He'd already chalked the place up as just another fixer-upper that needed more than the sellers admitted. But now, on day 3 of the job, he was under the house, flashlight beam catching on crumbling insulation and rusted nails. His job was to clear the area so his crew could pour new footings. As he crawled farther back, he noticed something odd. A portion of the crawlspace wall looked patched. Not in the usual way. Not cement. It was wood. Old wood, maybe plywood, painted the same brown as the surrounding beams, but just slightly off, almost like it had been added later. Nate reached forward and tapped it. Hollow. His brows drew together. He scraped along the edge with his pry bar, dust and splinters breaking free. With a few more tugs, the makeshift panel shifted. Behind it was a cavity, no more than 2 feet deep, wrapped in clear plastic, taped tightly. A box. He blinked, reached for it. The plastic crinkled in his hands. It was light. Too light. He pulled back a corner of the wrapping, revealing weathered wood beneath, the kind you'd expect from an old toy chest or a storage trunk left to rot in an attic. Only this one was bone dry, preserved. And on the lid, faintly etched into the grain, were 4 letters in a child's handwriting. E-M-I-L. Nate froze. The silence around him was absolute. A slow dread began to climb his spine, settling like a weight at the base of his skull. He didn't know what was inside, but whatever it was, it had been hiding for a very, very long time. Nate stared at the box in the crawl space for a long time before he moved again. The dust hung in the air like sleep, refusing to settle. He had seen strange things under old homes, animal bones, black mold, one time even a stash of antique dolls that gave him nightmares for a week. But this wasn't like any of that. This wasn't forgotten clutter or a rodent nest. This had been hidden. He pulled his gloves tighter, his breath a ghost in the cold air beneath the house. The wood of the crawl space creaked above him as he adjusted his position and reached for his tool belt. With a flathead screwdriver, he began cutting through the brittle layers of plastic that had been wrapped carefully, deliberately, like someone had wanted to keep the box dry forever. The tape peeled off with a reluctant crackle, pulling fine fibers from the wooden grain beneath. The chest was old, maybe cedar, with tarnished brass hinges and a rusted latch. Someone had once stained it dark, but time and dust had grayed the edges. On the lid, barely visible now, were faint scratches that at first looked accidental. Nate ran his gloved fingers across them, wiping away grime. No. They weren't scratches. They were letters. E-M-I-L-Y. The Y was missing, but he saw where it had been carved, unfinished, like someone had been interrupted. A cold pulse moved through him. He glanced back toward the opening of the crawl space where daylight was no more than a narrow slit between floorboards. The world up there was moving probably, but down here time was stalled. He shifted, lifted the lid carefully. It didn't open all the way at first. Something inside had swollen or shifted. He wedged the bar beneath and gave it a firm nudge. The lock gave with a groan. Inside, he found a folded pink sash, the kind little girls wear in scout troops. It was faded, but the embroidered patches still clung to it in a crooked line. Campfire, first aid, cookie sales. Beneath it lay a plastic name tag cracked clean through the middle. The ink on the white label inside had bled from moisture but was still readable. Emily Arndt Nate sat back on his heels, heart suddenly pounding in his ears. Beneath the name tag was a notebook, warped with water damage, the first few pages stuck together. The cover was decorated in glitter stars. He closed the chest, and for the first time in his 15 years of contracting, he backed out of a crawl space without finishing the job. This wasn't a wiring issue. This was a body waiting to be found. Or worse, a voice that had never stopped screaming. Nate sat on the edge of his truck bed with the chest between his knees, the smell of old wood and mildew clinging to his gloves. He hadn't called anyone yet, not the homeowner, not the police, not even his crew waiting for him on the next job site. For nearly an hour he'd just sat there, staring at the box as if it might do something, breathe, move, speak. It already had in its own way. He opened it again, slower this time. The lid gave its familiar moan, and the contents inside looked the same. A child's sash, a name tag, and a spiral-bound notebook no larger than a paperback. The sash had once been pink but had faded to a dusty rose. Its edges were frayed, and the patches, bears, tents, cookie boxes, were curling at the corners like dying leaves. It looked handmade, or maybe lovingly repaired, like something a mother might stitch in the evenings, one badge at a time, while her daughter beamed in excitement. The name tag was more clinical. Clear plastic cracked across the surface, the type you'd clip to a uniform or pin to a shirt at an event. Inside, on a wrinkled piece of index card, someone had written in careful, childish cursive, "Emily Rowork, Troop 4117. It was like a whisper from another life. Nate picked up the notebook. The cover was purple with worn glitter stars, the kind that flaked off onto your hands and clothes no matter how old they were. Emily's name was written in the top corner in blue marker. Below it, in smaller, cramped handwriting, a date. Jan 12, 2009, just days after the reports said she vanished. He opened to the first page. Some had stuck together, moisture and time gluing them like wounds never meant to reopen. The ink had bled across the paper in places, but other words stood out clearly. Drawings, too, stick figures, a house, a sun with long rays reaching the corners. A page filled with tally marks. Another with a list of names. Mom, Dad, Megan, with a heart next to it. Mrs. Whitaker, Scout Leader, Mr. Ferguson. Then a message. I don't think he's going to let me go, but I'm still here. I'm still here. Nate closed the notebook, hands trembling. It felt like holding a pulse, a breath that had never exhaled. She had written those words in the dark, somewhere near here, beneath the very house that had grown over her absence. He looked up at the empty street around him, and for a second it felt like the air had stopped moving. Emily Rourke, had not vanished. She had been speaking this whole time. No one had been listening. The knock on Melanie Rourke's door came just before dusk, the sky outside flat and gray like old dishwater. She hadn't been expecting anyone. Her days no longer held visitors, not really. Just deliveries, and the occasional neighbor who forgot what the past had carved into this house. The wind had picked up. Leaves skittered across the porch like they were trying to flee. When she opened the door, a man in plain clothes stood there with a badge clipped to his belt and a folder clutched in his gloved hands. "Mrs. Rourke," he said, voice careful, measured. "I'm Detective Keene. I'd like to talk to you about your daughter." Her heart did something strange then, didn't beat faster, didn't freeze. It paused, as if the world had given it one last moment of stillness before shattering it all over again. She didn't invite him in. He didn't ask. Instead, they stood on the porch in the cooling air while he explained what had been found. A wooden chest, a sash, a name tag, a notebook. "We sent the items for analysis," he said. "DNA on the notebook binding matched your daughter's brush. There's no question it's hers." Melanie's knees almost gave, but she didn't let them. She grabbed the edge of the porch post like it was the only solid thing left in the world. "Where?" He told her. Number 87, the house at the end, the one she hadn't walked past in over a decade. She didn't remember how she got to the phone, only that she dialed the number with hands that barely worked, the sound of each ring so loud it seemed to echo inside her skull. "Hello?" Derek's voice answered, groggy and distant, time zones away. "It's her, though," Melanie whispered. "They found something. It's Emily." There was silence, then a sharp breath. "Are you sure?" They confirmed it. Her voice cracked. Her name tag, her handwriting, her blood. Derek. It was all right there. It had been nearly 6 years since they'd spoken outside of holiday cards and the occasional legal document. The divorce had never made anything easier, only quieter. He said he'd get the first flight out. By the time night fell, Melanie had packed the brush and Emily's old baby book into a paper bag and placed it on the kitchen table like a shrine. She sat across from it, untouched tea cooling in front of her, waiting for the storm she had spent 15 years preparing for. Grief she had folded into every breath, finally to arrive. And this time it had a face, a name, a place. Hell had called them back, and they were finally going. Detective Keene set the notebook down between them like it was something sacred. The pages were fragile, water-stained, and curling at the corners, but the ink, faded though it was, still held her voice. Melanie reached out with hesitant fingers, brushing the cover gently, as if even the slightest pressure might erase what little remained of her daughter's presence. They sat in the back room of the precinct where the hum of fluorescent lights made everything feel artificial, sterile. But what was on the table between them was real, painfully real. More real than a headstone, more real than a missing person flyer on a telephone pole. "She wrote a lot," Keene said softly. "More than we expected. It's not just scribbles. It's consistent. A kind of journal. Memory. Witness." Melanie nodded, unable to speak. She opened the notebook slowly. The first few pages were filled with childish drawings. Stars. A house with a chimney. A stick-figure girl with long arms reaching toward the sky. Names appeared repeatedly. Mom, Dad, Megan, written like prayers, like spells meant to summon someone to find her. Farther in, the tone changed. The words came in short bursts, sometimes just one per line. Cold. He says I can't go outside. Today he brought crayons. I only got blue. I heard a train. There's a train. My name is Emily Rourke. I'm 10. I'm still here. Melanie's breath hitched. Each sentence struck like a match, brightening the dark corners of a horror she'd only imagined in vague, sanitized terms. But now it had texture. Now it had weight. Then came the pages with codes, a series of numbers, letters that didn't make sense at first, grids, arrows, sequences that looked random until Keene explained. "We brought in a cryptographer," he said. "Turns out she was trying to build a cipher, a substitution code. Took weeks to piece it together." "What did she write?" Melanie's voice came out hoarse. Keene opened his own copy. "She left messages, hidden ones." He read, "He watches at night. I can hear the door upstairs. If I bang too loud, he stops feeding me. I tried the window. Too small. He says he'll let me go when I forget my old name." The notebook fell quiet after that. Blank pages. Then one final scrawl at the very end. "If someone finds this, please tell my mom I tried." Melanie pressed her fingers to her lips, the tears silent and unrelenting. It wasn't just a notebook. It was her daughter's heartbeat, still echoing from under the floor. The Rourke case spread through Brookpine Circle like smoke. You couldn't see it, not all the time, but you could smell it, feel it in the way people lingered at their windows a little longer, in the way conversations dipped into sudden silence when anyone from the precinct knocked at a door. For 15 years, the neighborhood had lived under the illusion that time buried the past. Now they understood. Time doesn't bury anything. It only covers it in enough dust to fool you. Detective Keene went door to door with a notebook of his own, the spine frayed, pages filled with names and cross-references. The families who still lived there remembered the winter Emily disappeared with too much clarity. Most were cooperative, some weren't. But it was the new residents, the ones who had bought the houses long after the press vans packed up, that offered the most unexpected pieces. A couple on the corner who had bought their house 6 years ago from a widow in Florida told Keene about a strange renovation they'd discovered in the basement, a walled-off space behind an old cabinet. The concrete was new compared to the rest of the foundation, the cement still textured with rough swirls like someone had sealed it fast and dirty. They'd knocked it down during their remodel and found nothing inside but broken tiles and a tattered children's book, where the sidewalk ends, half melted by mildew. Across the street, a man who had moved in only last year remembered hearing something strange his first winter there, rhythmic tapping from under the floor. "I thought it was pipes," he said, eyes wide, voice barely a whisper. "My wife said it was mice. I never thought it could be." He didn't finish the sentence. Another woman, late 60s, who'd lived in the neighborhood since it was built, mentioned that Harold Stokes, the former owner of 87, had once offered to soundproof her garage when she complained about her dog barking at night. Said he had the materials. I told him no. I didn't like the way he said it. The pattern was becoming harder to ignore. One by one, the stories added up. Renovations done quickly and in cash, utility bills that spiked for months and then dropped to nothing, strange smells that had been chalked up to old house problems. Brookpine Circle had kept its secrets quiet for too long, but now the past was knocking back. And this time, someone was listening. The basement smelled of rot and rust even before they pried open the wall. It was an older house, one of the few in Brookpine that hadn't changed hands in over 20 years. The current owner, a quiet man named Curtis Dillard, had called the station after seeing the news about Emily. He wasn't sure if what he'd found during a recent plumbing inspection meant anything, but it didn't feel right, and hadn't for a long time. Detective Keene stood at the base of the narrow steps, flashlight beam trailing over the unfinished walls. It had been easy to miss. Behind a row of crumbling paint cans and an old mattress propped against the far wall, someone had plastered over what used to be a doorway. Not recently, years ago. Long enough that the lines had blurred beneath dust and neglect. They knocked it down carefully. Behind the wall, the air changed, cold, still, and strangely dry. The flashlight revealed a small, square room with concrete floors and no windows, just a single, bare light bulb hanging from a cord that swayed as if it remembered movement. It took a moment to understand what they were looking at. There were chains. 2 bolted to the far wall, their cuffs hanging limp like exhausted arms. Rust had claimed most of the metal, but Keene saw how deep the bolts ran. This wasn't for storage or pets. This was deliberate, measured. In the corner sat a child's plastic chair, bright red beneath a layer of dust. Beside it, a small bin filled with yellowed coloring books and broken crayons. A stuffed bear lay on its side, one eye missing, fur matted and graying. Then they saw the clipboard. It hung from a nail by the door, warped by humidity. Keene took it down carefully and flipped through the pages. The first sheet bore a list of names, children's names, each one in neat, slanted handwriting. Most had a black line drawn through them. Except the last, Emily Roark. No line. Keene didn't speak. He didn't have to. In that small, windowless room, surrounded by the ghosts of a silence no one had known how to hear, they stood for a long time. It wasn't just about Emily anymore. She hadn't been the first, and God help them, she might not have been the last. The woman's name was Cara Devlin, though she hadn't used it in years. She walked into the station with a hesitation that wasn't quite fear, more like exhaustion soaked deep into the bones. She wore an oversized coat, despite the warmth of early spring, and kept her hands tucked tightly into her sleeves as if they still remembered the cold of cement floors and metal cuffs. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft and deliberate, like someone who had practiced being quiet for survival. "I saw the room on the news," she said. "The red chair, the clipboard. I was there." Detective Keene didn't interrupt. He only nodded and reached for a recorder, sliding it onto the table between them. Kara's eyes flicked to it, then away. Her hand stayed in her lap. "I was 15, she continued. "I lived 3 towns over, and I used to cut through Brookpine to get to the bus stop. I'd take backyards, alleys, places people didn't notice. That's where he found me. Said he had a kitten that was sick. He asked if I could help him bring it inside." She smiled bitterly. "I liked cats." The rest of her story spilled out in pieces. 2 weeks in the room, no sunlight, just the red chair and the chains. She described the coloring books, the way he would bring her food wrapped in tinfoil and set it down without speaking. He never touched her, never hurt her in the way they all assumed, but he spoke to her like she wasn't real, called her different names, sometimes made her sing while he sat on the other side of the door. "He told me I was a replacement," she said, "that the others left, that I'd be better." One night, the lock didn't click all the way. She waited until she was sure he was asleep, crept out barefoot and bloodied, and ran until her lungs nearly burst. But she never told anyone. "Who would believe me?" she asked, tears sliding down her cheeks now. "I was already a runaway. I had no proof, and I couldn't go back. I couldn't even say the street name without freezing." Keene reached across the table, but didn't touch her. He just let her sit in the silence that followed, the kind that no longer felt like failure. "You saw the name on the list?" he asked. Kara nodded. "Emily Rowark. I remember her name. It was written on the wall in chalk just once, near the floor. She'd been there before me." She looked up finally, eyes clear for the first time. "I should have said something. Maybe then she wouldn't be a name in a notebook." Outside, the sky turned gray again, like it knew the storm wasn't over, only that someone had finally found their voice in the ashes. The bulletin board in the task force room had once been empty. Now it was a constellation of girls. Photos, names, dates, all pinned with red thumbtacks, thin threads stretching between them like veins. 24 girls, most between the ages of 9 and 14, all gone without trace. Some from quiet neighborhoods like Brookpine, others from rest stops, church parking lots, a laundromat in Nebraska. They'd vanished across state lines. Over 2 decades, their cases swallowed into the cold silence of missing persons reports, filed by weary parents and worn-out precincts. Detective Keene stood in front of the board with his arms crossed, eyes tracing the lines. It was Kara Devlin who had cracked the timeline wide open. Her memory, raw but exact, had pointed them to a year they'd nearly overlooked, 2002. A girl named Lena Frey had gone missing just 2 towns over, 6 months before Kara said she escaped. Her case had been closed quietly after rumors she'd run away. But now, her photo sat on the board, pinned beside Emily's. She wasn't the only one. A tech analyst pulled files from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, flagging cases with eerie similarities. No witnesses, abrupt disappearances, short windows of opportunity. Several victims had been seen talking to someone before they vanished. A man with a limp, a man with a clipboard, a man with a cat. Same man, different masks. The more they looked, the more the pattern emerged, not a flurry of chaos, but a slow, patient ritual. He didn't take often. He waited, selected, watched. They found maps buried in archived files from counties that hadn't cross-referenced in years. They found a photograph from 1999 of a girl in a yellow jacket with "For Sale" signs in the background, standing outside a property later sold under an alias. They tracked down old owners who remembered odd rental agreements, sudden disappearances, rooms sealed for repairs that were never completed. One mother, now in her 60s, wept as she held a blurry photo to the light. He told me she'd gotten on a bus, that he watched her go. Her daughter had been missing for 18 years, but she remembered the man. He had called himself Gregory, or Stan, or Martin, always polite, always forgettable, until now. Keene looked back at the board, the web of vanished girls staring out at him with hopeful, frozen eyes. It was never just Emily. She had been part of something bigger, a mosaic of horror stretched across years and borders, hiding in plain sight, and someone had to answer for them all. The sketches were all slightly different angles, different styles, different levels of detail. But they shared one impossible, unmistakable thing: the mask. It was always there. Some described it as blank, white, like porcelain. Others said it looked like a Halloween store special, grinning too wide, or featureless like a mannequin. One girl said it had freckles, another said it had none. But when the victims, those who escaped, those who survived long enough to see it, were asked to draw the man who took them, the mask was always the first thing they reached for. The face that wasn't a face. The shield. Detective Keene laid the sketches side by side on the conference table, hands clenched at his sides. The line work was crude, charcoal smudged or colored pencil worn down to nubs, but the shape was consistent, oval, smooth, too perfect, an artificial stillness. One sketch had a note scribbled in the margin. He always wore it at night, even when he didn't need to. Then came the memory. Cara Devlin had never seen his full face, but she remembered his eyes, wide-set, pale blue, surrounded by crow's feet, not born of laughter, but of squinting in dark places. When the forensic artist asked her to describe the rest, she hesitated. Then, slowly, she gave the nose, slightly crooked, like it had been broken once and poorly set. A thin mouth, a deep scar just below the left ear. She remembered because the mask had slipped once, and only once. When the composite was done, Keene held it in his hands for a long time before passing it down the table. It took the breath out of the room. The resemblance was undeniable. Harold Stokes, the recluse from Brookpine, the man who answered the door the night Emily Rourke vanished, the man who looked into the eyes of two detectives and said calmly, "She left," the man they had searched, the man they had cleared. Only now did they see what had been hiding in plain sight. Not his face, but the space around it, the silence, the gaps in records, the abandoned P.O. boxes tied to false names. Photos of him were scarce, and deliberately so. One driver's license, one blurry high school yearbook, and now a sketch that pulled all of it together like a final thread knotted too tightly to ignore. He had been hiding behind that mask for years, but now they had a face. And now, at last, it was time to tear the mask away. The name on the driver's license was Marcus Hall. Age 58. Occupation, program coordinator at Riverstone Youth Center. He lived in a tidy townhouse on the edge of a quiet suburb where the streets were lined with maple trees and parents waved from driveways without fear. A far cry from Brookpine Circle. A different world entirely. But it was him. The scar behind the ear. The pale eyes, the crooked nose that time and carelessness had failed to fix. The facial composite had done what 2 decades of questioning and doubt never could. It pulled Harold Stokes from his hiding place and dropped him back into the light. Detective Keene stared at the photo ID for a long moment before flipping through the rest of the file. The paper trail was thin but clever. Legal name change in 2010 under the pretext of a clerical error during a relocation. A forged birth certificate backed by a deceased cousin's social security number. Enough to pass background checks, even for work involving children. And it did. The Riverstone Youth Center's website was polished and inviting. There, under the staff page, was his photo, Marcus Hall, smiling with his hands resting on the shoulders of two teenage boys, their eyes squinting into sunlight. "Building young leaders through mentorship and community," the caption read. Keene's stomach turned. They pulled his tax records, his employment history, even his grocery receipts. He had been living quietly, almost modestly, in the years since he left Brookpine. No police reports, no complaints, not even a parking ticket. He donated to local food banks, volunteered on Saturdays, taught workshops about conflict resolution and resilience. One neighbor described him as a godsend for troubled youth. Another called him a quiet, gentle soul. But as the hours passed and the data poured in, a second version of him began to surface. Orders made to a P.O. box, soundproofing insulation, bolt cutters, camping supplies. A storage unit under a different alias. Receipts for books with titles like Behavioral Compliance in Adolescence and Silence as a Method. They cross-referenced his travel history with the map of missing girls. Too many coincidences. Too many disappearances within a 60-mile radius of places he'd lived, worked, or mentored. The man the world knew had been an invention. The real Harold Stokes never stopped hunting. He just learned how to wear a new skin, like the mask he wore in the basement room, blank, expressionless, almost human. Only now the mask was slipping. And underneath, something colder waited to be seen. The smell hit them first, faint but wrong, like copper and mildew, something rotting deep beneath layers of time and paint. The forensics team moved carefully, their gloved hands brushing along the seams of the drywall in what used to be a laundry room at the back of the house. The walls were newer than the rest, not quite flush with the original framing. Built hastily, covered poorly. Detective Keene watched from the hall, arms crossed tightly over his chest. He had been in this house once before, 15 years ago. Different season, different man. Same feeling in his gut. One of the techs called out, "We've got trace." They cut into the drywall with a precision that was almost surgical, lifting away chunks of plasterboard like peeling back skin. Behind it, insulation clung in damp clumps, and beneath that, stains. Dark brownish red. Some old enough to look black, as though the wall itself had bruised. Samples were swabbed and bagged. Luminol revealed the rest, a splash pattern, a smear near the floor, the kind of marks no one leaves accidentally. "It's blood," the lead tech confirmed. "A lot of it." The room fell quiet. Keene stepped forward, careful not to disturb the work. He didn't need the test results to know. He already felt it in the back of his throat, that unmistakable certainty that had chased him through this case like a shadow. Emily had been in this room. Maybe not for long, maybe only in the last moments. But she had been here. They brought in ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and a mobile command trailer. What had started as a simple demolition job had become a full-scale excavation site. The lawn was torn open like a wound, foundations scraped bare. Neighbors stood behind yellow tape in silence, watching as a backhoe lifted chunks of earth and poured them into screened sifters. In the crawl space where the notebook was found, they cut deeper into the soil. Bones were not their goal. They didn't expect to find her body intact. But they were looking for evidence, fragments, teeth, fibers. Something that could tell the truth her voice never got to finish. Inside the house, the walls bled secrets. Every nail, every floorboard now whispered things they had missed before, things they were finally ready to hear. Emily had never really left. She had been here all along. And now the house was giving her back. The air in Brookpine Circle hadn't changed much. It still smelled of pine bark and damp earth, and the wind still carried the sound of dogs barking in backyards and wind chimes tapping like anxious fingers. But to Melanie Rourke, the neighborhood felt smaller now, shrunken by grief and time, its edges too sharp. She stood across the street from the house they used to own, arms folded tight against her chest, watching as crime scene tape fluttered on the porch like warning flags in a forgotten war. Derek stepped beside her. He'd flown in 3 days ago, and though he hadn't said so aloud, it was clear this place hurt him just as much. His eyes, once so certain, never quite settled. They flitted across lawns, windows, porches, as if some part of him still expected to see a little girl bounding down the steps, a box of cookies in her arms, and a smile that belonged to neither of them, but something brighter, larger. "She hated the snow," Melanie said softly, her voice almost lost in the wind. That night, she came back in 3 times before she finally left. Couldn't get her scarf right. Kept asking me to fix it. Derek didn't respond. His hands were deep in his jacket pockets, his shoulders stiff. "I should have walked with her," she added, her voice tightening, "or told her no, just one more night inside, but I wanted to show her we trusted her, that she was growing up." "She was growing up," Derek said. "You didn't do anything wrong." Melanie turned toward him, eyes red but steady. "Didn't I? Because after she disappeared, you blamed me in every silence. Every night you didn't come home. You buried yourself in work, in that basement project, in anything but this family. And you buried her," he snapped before he could stop himself. "You packed away her room like a storage closet, like she wasn't coming back." There it was. Years of unspoken things finally laid bare under the indifferent sky. Melanie's chin trembled, but she didn't look away. "I had to, Derek. I couldn't walk past her bed every day and not break." He looked down. "I know." They stood in the brittle quiet, just 2 broken people trying to stand upright under the weight of 15 years of pain. It didn't feel like healing. Not yet. But maybe it was something. A crack in the wall that let light through. "I kept her toothbrush," he said suddenly, "in a plastic bag, top drawer of my desk." Melanie's breath caught. "Me too," she whispered. "Her favorite cup. It's still in the cabinet. I never used it." They stood there a while longer, watching the house, the place that had once held everything, and now, maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something that could still be built. The calls started just after midnight. One by one, detectives picked up the phone, their voices steady but thick as they spoke the words no parent should ever have to hear, not after this long, not like this. Some of the families had moved on the surface, moved houses, states, built new lives around the empty chair at the table. Others had never left their grief. Their Christmas stockings still had 5 names instead of 4. Their daughters' bedrooms were shrines behind closed doors, dusted weekly, untouched for years. Now the silence was being broken. The forensics team had linked hair fibers, clothing remnants, partial DNA profiles from the basement and storage unit to at least 4 more girls. All of them missing. All of them once thought to be runaways or cold cases that would never see justice. The files were opened. Their faces were added to the board. Keene stood in front of them again. It was no longer a constellation. It was a chorus. Girls with braces and ponytails. Girls in school uniforms, cheer jackets, hoodies. Some had vanished in the same region. Others, hundreds of miles away. But they had all met the same ghost in different masks. All ended up as names etched in the margins of a monster's ledger. The press conference came the next morning. Flanked by state officials and the FBI, Keene read each name aloud. His voice did not falter, but his fingers gripped the podium like he needed it to keep standing. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked at the photos. The media frenzy hit like a storm. Every channel, every feed, every whisper, on every street corner turned to the case that was no longer just about Emily Rourke. Headlines screamed, "Serial predator in suburbia," "Basement of horror uncovered," "The youth mentor who hid monsters in his walls." News vans camped outside the homes of families that had already suffered too much. Some parents chose to speak. Others shut their doors and pulled blinds tight. A few gave tearful interviews, their hands clutching school pictures and half-faded flyers. "My daughter's name was Talia," one mother said, her voice shaking. "She was 12. She loved to sing, and now I know she didn't run away. She didn't leave me. He took her." Each story was a splinter driven deeper into the nation's heart. But through the noise, a truth began to rise. These weren't just victims. They were voices, long buried, finally heard. Girls who had been lost were being found again, not whole, not in time, but not forgotten. Not anymore. It happened on a Thursday morning, just after sunrise, in a quiet cul-de-sac outside Helena, Montana. The street was already awake. Dog walkers, a school bus, a sprinkler hissing over yellowing grass. No one noticed the black SUV at first. Not until the second one pulled in behind it, lights low but unmistakably federal. Within minutes, half the block stood at their windows, coffee mugs forgotten, curtains barely parted. Marcus Hall, or Harold Stokes, opened the door without resistance. He was still wearing his morning slippers. He blinked at the officers on his porch like they'd come to read a meter or sell him magazines. Then he saw the badge, and his face changed, not with surprise, but something colder, recognition, as if he'd always known this was coming, but had allowed himself the fantasy that it wouldn't. They cuffed him on the porch, while neighbors watched in stunned silence. A woman across the street dropped her coffee. A child stared from the back seat of a minivan as his mother slowly pulled out of the driveway. The agent searched the house that same day. Inside, it was spotless. Lined bookshelves, modest furniture, tasteful art. A chess set in the corner of the living room, mid-game. In the den, a desk drawer held several ID cards, each with different names, different addresses. Some expired, some current. In a false bottom beneath that same drawer, they found the real evidence. Locks of hair, each wrapped in tissue and labeled by date. Recordings on old cassette tapes, voices of girls singing, reciting numbers, reading from books. The tape hissed between sentences. A man's voice, his voice, interrupting softly, directing them. Again, slower this time. Smile when you say it. He had recorded them like trophies. There were maps, too, hand-drawn and annotated in the margins. Push-pin notes for rest stops, bus stations, back roads. A detailed sketch of Brookpine Circle from 15 years ago, including a mark beside number 87, best angle, no cameras. When the boxes were stacked and labeled and carried out, the street was quiet again. Only the sound of tires crunching gravel and the birds still singing in the trees. Back in Brookpine, Melanie Rourke sat at her kitchen table when the call came. She didn't cry. She just exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for 15 years. Across the country, dozens of families did the same. The man who wore masks, changed names, and slipped through years like fog, he was finally behind glass. And this time, there was no door left for him to disappear behind. They began to stitch the truth together from scraps. The notebook offered pieces, frayed edges of thought, half-sentences buried under water damage. The forensics team uncovered more: a child's fingerprint on the inside of a wooden beam, a strand of hair sealed between floorboards. But it was Cara Devlin's voice, trembling but resolute, that filled in the dark spaces. She remembered the routine, the rituals. And somewhere in her memory, Emily appeared, not in person, but in the things left behind. Drawings, scratch marks, a name whispered in sleep. Emily had lasted longer than most. She'd been taken in early January, just after the holidays. Her name had appeared in the basement logs around that time, penciled in neatly, not yet crossed out. For a while, Harold, no longer Marcus, no longer a ghost, kept her locked in the crawl space, small, confined. He brought her food on paper plates and made her recite songs to prove she wasn't losing her voice. Kara remembered hearing them, lullabies, school songs, the Scout Pledge. She was trying to stay normal, Kara said, barely above a whisper. She kept saying, "I'll remember who I am. He can't take that." The final week was clearer. Something had changed. Emily had tried to escape. The notebook referenced a crack in the crawlspace wall, a weak spot she picked at with a broken spoon. Forensics later found it. Just an inch of loosened paneling behind a vent. He found it too. The notebook's tone shifted after that. He took the stars. I can't see the sky anymore. Keene believed that was when she was moved to the deeper room, the basement cell, the one with the chains. There, she stopped writing in full sentences. Instead, she drew the same image over and over again. A door, a handle just out of reach, always open, always empty behind it. Her last entry was different, almost gentle. Mom, I forgive you for letting me go alone. Dad, I remember the beach, the shells, the pink one I kept. It's okay now. I'm not afraid. If someone finds this, tell them I tried. The autopsy couldn't confirm much. Her remains were too fragmented, her time buried too long. But they found the pink shell, tucked between a floorboard and the foundation, wrapped in cloth like a prayer. She had kept it. All that time. Emily hadn't been forgotten. And now, after all the years she spent alone, beneath a house full of silence, the world was finally answering back. The truth came in waves, never all at once. It was Kara again who opened the door to it. Her interviews grew longer as she remembered more, not just about the room or the routines, but about the way he spoke. The words he used like levers, small and careful, designed to shift the girls inside their own minds. "He never let us keep our names," she said during one of the sessions, her voice distant. "He said we were starting over, that names were part of what made us vulnerable, so he gave us new ones." For her it had been Lily. For Emily, it had been Daisy. They found it written in chalk under the lip of the crawlspace wall. Daisy was here. Small letters, jagged, like they were drawn with a shaking hand or stolen crayon. There were no hearts, no smiley faces, just the name. Stark, unnatural. Melanie Rourke Forsky stared at the photograph of the chalk marking for a long time before she asked the question that had haunted her since the notebook had been found. Did she forget who she was? Keene didn't answer right away. From the recovered tapes, the investigators heard her voice, thin, uncertain, responding to questions from the man they now knew too well. "What's your name?" "Daisy." "How old are you, Daisy?" 10, I think, maybe 9. She hesitated. "I used to be someone else, but I can't remember her." It was that line that broke them all. The recordings were evidence, but they played like eulogies, the cadence of her voice, trying to please, trying to survive. You could hear her getting smaller, less certain, less Emily. A trauma specialist brought in to help process the material explained it gently. That this was common, that long-term isolation, especially at a young age, could fracture memory. That psychological manipulation could blur the boundaries between safety and submission. Names, in particular, were powerful things. If he made her say it enough times, she said, then Daisy became her survival. and Emily faded. Melanie pressed her palm to her mouth. Derek just looked down, and still in that notebook Emily had written her real name, clung to it in ink, even as her voice betrayed her. It meant she remembered, even if only in secret, in silence, in darkness. He called her Daisy, but she never stopped being Emily. And now the world would remember her name. The final page of the notebook had been overlooked at first. It was water-damaged and torn, folded in half like it had been hidden deliberately, maybe tucked beneath the back cover before time and dampness peeled it forward. The handwriting was different, tighter, rushed. What looked like random letters at first, a string of consonants and numbers, punctuated by uneven spacing and symbols that seemed almost childlike. It wasn't until Keene passed it to the Bureau's behavioral linguist that the message began to speak. "It's a substitution cipher," the analyst said, "but not a simple one. It's layered. She must have used a pattern, something familiar to her." They brought in the sash, the badges, scout codes, camp puzzles. Emily had learned these things for fun once, games in tents beneath pine trees. But this had been survival. The decoding took hours, and when the letters finally fell into place, when the symbols gave way to words, the room went silent. "I hope you find this. If you do, it means I didn't get out. But I tried. I was brave. I stayed me. I love you, Mom. I love you, Dad. Please don't let him hurt anyone else. Tell the other girls they were not forgotten. Tell them they matter. We mattered. I was here." Melanie held the translated page in her hands like it was made of fire. The tears came without sound, her shoulders curling forward as if the weight of those words pressed down physically. I was here. 3 words, enough to build a monument, enough to shatter a nation. They printed the message, posted it beside Emily's photo at the press briefing. Not because it was evidence, but because it was her voice, her last act. A goodbye not cloaked in fear, but in love. Defiant. Fierce. She hadn't just written a farewell, she had written a legacy. A reminder that even when trapped in darkness, she had looked beyond herself. Derek read it aloud on camera. His voice broke on the word mattered. It played on every news station that night. A child's final message from beneath the floorboards, speaking not only to her parents, but to the missing, the lost, the overlooked. She had no idea if anyone would ever see it. But she wrote it anyway, because even at the end, Emily Rourke believed someone would come, that her voice would reach beyond the crawl space, the house, the years, and it had. The courthouse was packed before the sun even cleared the trees. Reporters filled the benches alongside parents, neighbors, and strangers who had followed the story since Emily's name reappeared in headlines. Some were there for justice, others for closure, a few just to believe it had really happened, that the monster they'd passed on the sidewalk or nodded to at the grocery store had finally been dragged into the light. Harold Stokes sat at the defense table in a pressed blue suit, his hair combed neatly to the side, as if pretending at normalcy might still save him. But he didn't look at the jury. He didn't look at the Rourkes. He stared straight ahead, blank-eyed, the same way he had for months now. He never spoke, not once. The prosecution didn't need his voice. They had Cara Devlin's. She took the stand on the 3rd day. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. She told them about the basement, about the light bulb that buzzed, about the meals passed under a closed door, and the way her name disappeared inside that house. "He told me I wasn't real," she said, "that my old life didn't matter, that I had been chosen for something better." She looked directly at Harold then, unflinching. It was a lie, every word. One by one, more voices joined hers. A girl from Iowa, now in her 20s, who had escaped before the police even knew she'd been taken. A social worker who'd once interviewed Marcus Hall for a mentoring program and couldn't stop shaking as she identified his photo. Each story added weight. Each memory drove another nail into the defense's argument that he was mentally unwell, confused, incapable of harm. Then came the evidence, the recordings, the notebooks, the chalk writing on the walls, and Emily's note. Melanie sat in the front row, Derek beside her, the translated page folded in her lap like scripture. When the prosecutor read it aloud, the courtroom stilled. No shuffling, no whispers, just the soft, unbearable sound of grief filling the cracks between every word. "I was here," the prosecutor repeated. "She wrote that knowing she might never be found. She wrote it for her parents, for the others, and for all of us." It took the jury 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Harold didn't blink as the verdict was read. He didn't flinch when sentenced to life without parole, but for the first time he looked at the floor, as if he could still hear the echoes coming up from beneath it. The courtroom exhaled. Justice had arrived. Not fast enough, not full enough, but it had come. And this time it was staying. The sky over Brookpine was gray but still. No wind, no sun, just that soft, unmoving kind of overcast that made the world feel suspended, like it was holding its breath. Emily's memorial was held on a Saturday morning in late March, 15 years to the day since she disappeared. The date wasn't chosen for sentiment. It was chosen for truth. This was the day she left, and now, finally, it would be the day she came home. The town turned out in quiet waves. Neighbors who had once searched the woods in snowfall, her old troop leader now grayer and slower, former classmates who remembered pink coats and thin mints, but not much else. They brought flowers, letters, warm hands tucked into coat pockets. Some didn't know what to say, so they said nothing. But they came. Melanie and Derek stood side by side at the front, holding hands. Their fingers trembled but didn't let go. The urn sat on a table between them, flanked by white hyacinths. Emily's favorite, the ones she used to draw with crooked stems and oversized petals in the corners of her school worksheets. Behind them was a photo, not the one from the flyers, but one from a beach trip when she was 7. Her hair was wind-tossed, mouth open in laughter, arms raised mid-skip. She was more than what happened to her, Melanie said, her voice steady but low. She was bright and silly and stubborn in all the best ways. She loved stories. She believed people could be better if someone just believed in them first. She paused. And that's what she did. She believed even when no one came, even when he tried to take everything. Derek didn't speak, but when she reached for the urn, he helped her. They walked to the edge of the small memorial garden by the woods where a stone had already been placed. It was simple. Emily Rourke. I was here. The urn was opened. Ash scattered into the air like dust returning to the breath of the earth. Petals from the hyacinths followed, tossed by those who had gathered. They danced in the wind that finally returned, gentle, insistent, carrying everything home. No longer lost, no longer alone. She was surrounded now by people who remembered, people who would not let her name be a headline or a footnote or a warning. She was a daughter, a friend, a voice. And now she was free. The demolition took less than a day. By noon, the old house on Brookpine Circle was gone, reduced to splinters and dust, hauled off in dump trucks and backhoes as if it had never stood there at all. People watched from across the street, through curtains and half-open blinds, their gazes heavy with unease. No one cheered. No one waved. It wasn't that kind of ending. It was an unspoken pact. Remove the shell, but never forget what it held. The land sat empty for nearly a year, overgrown with weeds and wild flowers, until a young couple from out of town bought it on a real estate whim. They never asked much about the history. Maybe they didn't want to know. Maybe they didn't believe it. The builders put up a sleek modern home. Big windows, clean lines, no basement. Just a single-story layout on a new concrete slab. Bright, open, unburdened. The family moved in during spring. They had a daughter, 6 years old, with tangled brown hair and a plastic recorder she played too often. She liked to sit on the floor in the living room where the sun pooled warm through the glass and build puzzles or draw with crayons, her legs splayed in a W, the way kids do before they grow into the world. One afternoon, as her parents unpacked in the kitchen and the breeze from the open window lifted the scent of new paint and lemon cleaner, the little girl paused. She looked down at the hardwood beneath her. She tilted her head, listening. There it was again. A soft sound, not quite a knock, not quite a creak. Something that didn't belong. It came from under her palm, faint and distant, like someone breathing behind a door. She pressed her ear to the floor. "Hello?" she whispered, unsure why her voice had gone so quiet. The sound didn't return. She sat up, blinked, and rubbed at her ear like she'd imagined it. Then she picked up her red crayon and began to draw. A flower. A name. She spelled it slowly, sounding it out the way she'd just started to learn in school. Daisy. In the empty space where the past had once lived, the silence stirred. The crawl space was gone, but sometimes the echoes stayed.